Welcome back to the Feds, insiders bringing accountability, integrity, and reform to a very broken bureaucracy. Here, all are encouraged to take a stand for truth. Thank you for joining us today. I am Stephanie Weidel. Please like, comment, and subscribe to this podcast on the platform where you're listening or watching, and please share this episode. Today, we welcome to the podcast former captain in the Army, John Frankman, who served as a Green Beret assigned to the 7th Special Forces Group. He considers refusing the immoral and illegal COVID vaccine his proudest moment. We discuss his story, where John ended up separating from the Army in 2023. We discuss the recent letter the Army sent to involuntarily separated soldiers, what he'd say to anyone who says the military owns your body, and how he's been working to make sure this never happens again. Welcome, John. Thanks so much for coming on with us today.
Thanks so much for having me, Stephanie. I really appreciate it.
Would you tell us a little bit of your background, but also specifically how you and why you entered the Army?
Sure. So I came to the Army on active duty in 2015. I actually commissioned out of ROTC in 2011, and I wanted to use the gifts God gave me for the greater good. That was basically my interest in joining the military. I love our country. I love physical fitness, leadership, and I thought that how God gifted me would be good in the military. So I commissioned in 2011. I ended up going to seminary for 4 years to be a chaplain and discerned that wasn't what God was calling me to do. And then I branched infantry. So I went through Infantry Basic Officer Leadership Course, Ranger School, Airborne School, then tried out for Special Forces, went to the assessment and selection, then Special Forces Qualification Course, SERE School, which is Survival, Evasion, Resistance, and Escape, and through the whole qualification course and ended up graduating that in 2020.
Wow. So on your bio, you also said you're a Green Beret. Would you talk about the significance of that?
Sure. So Special Forces, that's synonymous with Green Beret. And every branch has its own special operations. So Navy, their special operations is Navy SEALs. For the Army, we have U.S. Army Special Operations Command. And underneath that, you have 1st Special Forces Command, Ranger Regiments. You have Aviation Regiment, Special Operations Aviation Regiment. But Special Forces, we're kind of distinct in that we practice or we train for unconventional warfare and foreign internal defense. So we work by, with, and through partner forces, one, either to overthrow the government or to work with the government to quell some kind of insurgency. So Afghanistan, we're trying to quell the insurgency. We're trying to get rid of the Taliban. And yeah, if it's unconventional warfare, it's trying to work with the partner force to overthrow the occupying power or the illegitimate government.
So what did you start seeing in 2020?
Well, in 2020, we had COVID coming out, and we had a pretty radical response to that. And I was in the military freefall school, so jumping out of planes at 14,000 feet nighttime, so wasn't as worried about kind of dying by the virus. But it does seem like a lot of pretty difficult people were being very cautious. So that kind of delayed my move to 7th Special Forces Group. And I think the first experience at 7th Special Forces Group that kind of caught my eye was having a transgender major within my battalion. So this was a Special Forces Green Beret who at West Point, wrestler, married, kids, transitions, and having to navigate, okay, how do I interact with this individual? So for that, I asked legal assistance, what am I legally required to call this person? They said, you can go with rank and last name. So I was basically the only officer that I had noticed, at least, not calling him ma'am.
Wow, this is very interesting. We just had on an attorney from the Heritage Foundation talking about the pronoun policies within the government. Every agency at this point, every military branch have their own pronoun policies. We do know that the State Department has said, we will fire you if you are caught, I guess, consistently calling someone by the wrong pronoun.
Yeah.
Well, so you saw this all the way back then.
I saw it back then, and yeah, just as a Catholic, as a Christian, I can't lie, and I'm not going to kind of participate. It's not charitable. It's not loving to this individual. I am actually loving him more than others by being honest with him and not trying to kind of feed those delusions. So did see that back then, yes.
Wow. Okay. So in the beginning of 2020, COVID came to our shores.
Right.
What did you see within the military at that time?
So at that time, I saw that we were kind of halting training sort of altogether, that we didn't know what was going on. We didn't know how deadly the disease was going to be, but we were taking kind of very reactive measures to ensure that we didn't get sick. And I think that there's kind of this idea that you always have to do everything you can to mitigate risk. So even if it doesn't make sense, you just have to do something. And that's kind of a knee-jerk reaction whenever there's some kind of problem. So yeah, like masking requirements, working remotely. I would have moved probably by April had I been able to move, but I couldn't move until June, and I needed to get some kind of a special memo. So in order to move Special Forces Green Berets who just finished the qualification course to their next duty assignment, you needed to have that permission. And then at 7 Special Forces Group, it was very stringent. If someone got sick, if you were contact traced, you had to spend a lot of time in quarantine. So I'm sure I spent like months just in quarantine for whatever reason. You arrive to 7th Group, okay, wait 2 weeks before you come in. You're going to go. I went to Spain for some language training 2 weeks before, 2 weeks after, don't come to work. So just these kind of sort of outrageous policies that didn't really help readiness. And then we saw that even more so as the shot was coming out.
Were you concerned about shots before 2020? Had you given it any thought?
I had not given it a thought at all. I had received all the shots that I was given and did not think twice about it.
So the vaccine mandate is rolled out. When for the Army was it rolled out?
So it was rolled out for everybody in August of 2021, but the story certainly starts before then. And I think for everyone, the pressure was much greater before the actual mandate came in for service members. So I took a Special Forces detachment September of 2020, and we were pretty honest with each other about everything going on. And we knew there was kind of a vaccine being developed, or vaccine, right? Whatever experimental kind of shot. And I was concerned because there was aborted fetal cells being used within the drug. And to me, that meant remote material cooperation, something I can't participate in unless there's some kind of grave reason. And because it wasn't mandatory, I thought that at least in the beginning, I wouldn't be able to receive it just based on trying to please my commander or get a mission. So I just tell my guys early 2021 that I will neither punish or reward you based on whether you get the shot. I personally don't want to get it. It was for those religious reasons. And then we kind of, as a team, continued to discuss it. So we were aware of the kind of medical health issues, especially for men, for heart issues, myocarditis, pericarditis. And we started getting kind of harassed for it because what the military did is they made it a readiness issue. And the way that commanders would try to compare themselves with others was based on how vaccinated their units were. So every single stand-up meeting that you go to, which is like a morning meeting with the company, it's, hey, we have 200 people, 100 are fully vaccinated, 50 are the first shot. We have this many people who are sick. And that was kind of what was going on. And you put it in your readiness bullets. You'd have green boxes, yellow boxes, red boxes. Actually, detachment commanders, so other Special Forces captains, when they would go brief different higher elements or units to go down South America, they would say, oh, I have this many guys vaccinated on my team. And I remember another captain coming up to me and telling me, oh, I had their first fully vaccinated team. Everybody loved it. So this was kind of a way for captains, for leaders to try to get ahead. I know some team sergeant would say, hey, if you guys don't get the shot, you're getting off the team. And actually, my team sergeant and I, we were both threatened by the sergeant major a number of times with retaliatory action. So I was told I was screwing up in more colorful language, that I was screwing up my career, should look for work outside the military, that ruined my reputation, no way to come back from this, that if my team lost a mission because they didn't have the shot, he would kick guys out of the team, he would kick guys out of the company, he would send them to undesirable assignments. So there was this kind of pressure, and eventually the policies is what pressured and really tried to hurt individuals based on how long you had to be in quarantine. So a person who's not vaccinated might be 1 week with exposure, someone who's vaccinated 1 week with exposure, someone who's not 2 weeks. Those who aren't vaccinated have to wear masks. And then they made it a deployment requirement. So my team was actually supposed to deploy to a Central American country that didn't have a shot mandate. But because of the requirement, we weren't allowed to go there.
So they didn't send you all. So what happened to you?
Yep. So basically, what happened was June of 2021. We were doing military freefall training. I get a call from my company commander. He says, "You need the shot in order to deploy." And he knows my team doesn't want to get it, but asks, "What's it going to be? Are you guys going to get it, or are we going to take the mission?" I say, "You have to take the mission." I only have one guy who wants to get it. I asked if he would be willing to accept natural immunity, and they said they're not willing to accept the risk. And to me, that was extremely ironic, given that we were in Arizona jumping out of planes in the middle of the night with oxygen equipment at 14,000 feet. So what ended up happening is another SF detachment ended up taking the mission from us. So after Afghanistan, after deployments and kind of combat deployments, we were kind of fighting over trips to Central South America. So it got a lot more competitive. So what they would do later on is if you weren't vaccinated, you weren't able to go to different training events to deploy, and just kind of your general reputation was sort of hurt.
What was the climate within the other military personnel that you had contact with? What were they thinking of this?
It was so much worse for people that weren't me, honestly. And I have a buddy who was in the Coast Guard, for instance, who I went to seminary with, and he wasn't allowed to get off the boat, not even to go to mass. So he would be close to shore. Everybody else would be able to leave. And he's this Catholic who went to seminary and he couldn't go to mass. I heard about another unit where there was a battalion sergeant major who stood in front of his unit and said, "If you're vaccinated, you can go stand over there. You have the day off. If not, put your rucksack on. We're going for a long, grueling march." People were harassed and policies were used against them in a very seditious way. I think within Fort Bragg, you had to have a vax card in order to go to the gym, in order to go into the dining facility, that you were basically separated, treated differently. And there's another girl who I went up to DC with last week, Brianna Cespedes. She was Air Force E4, and she was put in quarantine for 140 days over the course of 2 years. So that's about like a quarter almost of those 2 years was spent in solitary confinement, more or less.
I've had contact with Brianna. It's really a sick story. Would you tell your story of the red wristbands that you had to wear during a drill as an unvaxxed person, and how your gear was also labeled?
Sure, absolutely. So basically, chronologically, the mission's taken away in June. In August is when the mandate came out. My team, we all saw the mandate. We knew it wasn't legal because we knew there was no FDA-approved shot. But as a kind of reaction to not going on that one trip, that deployment we were supposed to have, we got sent into this training assignment to Louisiana. It's called the Joint Readiness Training Center. It's out in Fort Polk, Louisiana, middle of the woods. And it's like a thousands of person exercise where you're kind of simulating a modern warfare, a kind of force and force, large scale warfare. And in order to mitigate risk, they had service members who were not vaccinated wear red wristbands that said unvaccinated and put red tape on their gear. So you had to indicate that you were unclean. And that was supposed to be some kind of risk mitigation measure. I don't think they really saw the irony in what they were doing. And
yeah, I mean, doesn't that sound familiar to anyone who knows history? Like the gold star?
Right. Absolutely. Well, yeah, it absolutely does. It was pretty wild. And my team started, we just didn't do it. I just told them, "Hey, let's just not do this. We're just not going to do it." So
how many people were in your team?
So I had 12 people in my team. And what's pretty amazing is that we only had, I think over the course of it, 3 of them were vaccinated, but it was like 10 of 12 not vaccinated by the time the mandate came out. And it might seem as though, and what a lot of people don't understand is the pressure was so great that most people got the shot before it was ever mandatory. And they did it because of policies from the Secretary of Defense, from different generals. They were trying to scheme on different ways to pressure, coerce, use legal power, illegal power, use what we would call command influence or their ability. So they might say risk to force, risk to mission. So commanders have the ability to diminish the risk of the force or analyze the risk of the mission, but they would make something arbitrary up, such as, "Oh, I can't risk sending you here because you're not vaccinated." Like that's crazy.
So, okay, so it's fall of 2021. Exemptions were due when?
So fall of 2021, and exemptions for me were due in October. So actually, it was pretty wild. I told you the story about the wristband. Well, that kind of trip to hell gets even worse when it's 10 days long. You're in the middle of the woods, and we have a major get sent to the middle of the woods in order to counsel us. There's like a 12-hour break. We're in the field, and everyone who's not vaccinated, which is pretty much the whole team, we're put in a room, and this major gives us kind of this paperwork, and it's basically you have 72 hours to make up your mind of whether you're going to get the shot or not, and
Wait,
just
so
indicate
you
what you're going to
guys
do.
are like training
We're
for
training,
combat, and
right?
they send someone out there to counsel you about how you should get this experimental material put into your bodies.
Right. And I don't think we were going to take it then, but it was you need to make up your mind within 72 hours, and then further administrative action will be taken against you depending on how you choose. So potentially a general officer memorandum of reprimand or some kind of negative counseling paperwork that can affect your career. So I just end up calling my company commander and asking him, "Hey, sir, why are we getting counsel in the middle of the woods? How do you expect guys to make career life decisions without the proper medical, religious, or legal resources? How am I supposed to show guys that training to fight and win wars is more and more just more important than administrative bullshit when this is happening? And just we're not going to get training value with this hanging over our heads." So we ended up having the counseling pushed back to October to when we got out of the woods, and that was even ridiculous as well because we by that point knew the FDA EUA distinction. So every single person is telling the company commander, "There's no FDA approved product. There's no FDA approved product." In fact, my counseling statement, I said I disagree with paragraph 2. It says that the drug is safe and effective. It's not safe. We've had 15,000 deaths in the vaccine adverse events reporting system. It's not effective. People still are getting sick. And paragraph 5 says that I'm required to take an FDA approved shot. There's no FDA approved shot. I disagree with this. I can't follow this order. Boom, take that paperwork. The next day, yeah.
What was the response?
Well, the response for that is that if you didn't turn a religious exemption in or didn't do anything, you would get a general officer memorandum of reprimand a few days later. So that was a Tuesday. I think by that Thursday, had I not turned my religious exemption in, that would have happened because that Thursday, those of us who didn't put a religious exemption in, who didn't turn any paperwork, they were greeted with the battalion commander, the battalion sergeant major, a medic, the battalion doc, medic to give you the shot, the chaplain, the JAG, the lawyer. Everybody's just ready to slap you with administrative paperwork to, basically make sure that you take it or that you suffer the consequences. So I turned my religious exemption in that Wednesday. Also, we got a chance to talk to the doctors, and we were explaining this whole situation with them too, the FDA EUA distinction.
And what did they say?
They just said that it's medically interchangeable. They said it has the same products, and they were going to show us the whole product list. And we said, that's not what we're worried about. We're worried about the liability. And truly, my service members, they don't necessarily care about the aborted fetal cell issue. They do care about liability. They're worried about their families. How are they going to take care of their families if they get injured? It's a very noble thing that they'd be willing to play Russian roulette for the sake of their families. But they just wanted to make sure. So they actually wanted to be ordered to take the shots. They could point the finger at the person who made them do it. Because I think we're all tracking here that emergency use authorization means that drug companies can't be held liable. Well, even less liable than they are under the whole 1986 Act, right? It's pretty insane. Just a lot of stuff going on. I ultimately ended up leaving the military because 1, missed out on all the different deployments and work opportunities. 2, I was taken off the team early. And then 3, I was selected to actually teach philosophy and ethics at West Point. And I was not allowed to teach ethics. So it's a very ironic thing. It's because I couldn't travel. I couldn't move. So the policy, it was made to punish people who were going against the grain. And even after the mandate, even after putting the religious exemption in, I'm not allowed to move. I'm not allowed to travel. I can't deploy. So not being able to move to grad school is what then prevents me from kind of continuing being a career officer who gets to mentor cadets, teach them ethics and philosophy.
So when did you separate from the Army?
So I separated July 1st of this year, 23.
Wow. So what happened within that year or a year and a half.
Yeah. So you're saying once the mandate went out and then to now?
Yep. Once you put the exemption in, once you couldn't do anything, you couldn't be deployed, you couldn't do anything.
Sure.
What happened between then and when you actually separated?
Right. So turned the paperwork in and just was waiting for my exemption to get denied. That's more or less it. I was just waiting for it. I was nervous about it. I didn't know if I was going to make it to when my commitment was up, which was July 1st of this year. And then in December, I was told that I'd be taken off my team. Typically, you get 18 months to 2 years, preferably 2 years on a detachment. And I was removed at 15 months because the team was supposed to have a trip to a Central or South American country. So not being able to deploy didn't make sense to keep me on the team. So I ended up getting put in the operations office and spent kind of the rest of my career there. And I was wondering whether I wait to get my exemption denied or do I wait until, I don't know, just to have more paperwork or something to kind of show or fight with later. And at the same time, I'm seeing different COVID policies being violated. For instance, I had to plan a battalion ball at the time. If you had over 300 individuals, you had to get like 2-star permission or something like that. That was kind of like the vaccination or the COVID rule. Yeah, I'm asked to plan this thing. And they said, oh, we're not worried about that. Well, I wanted to respond with, oh, if we're not worried about COVID policy, why don't you just throw me back in my team and let me go to this other country if we're just going to pick and choose which rules? I brought up to my company commander as well when I was taken off the team that, hey, there's this one policy that says I'm supposed to get 18 months to 24 months on a team. And I guess there's this other one that says I'm not allowed to deploy. So since we're kind of like picking and choosing policies, why can't I just stay on my team? It's totally to serve a political agenda and to kind of further people's careers.
What did your colleagues say about this?
Oh, I mean, a lot of the guys respected it. I think some folks didn't necessarily understand it. So there was another captain who got selected to go teach at West Point, and he was like, don't you want to just PCS and go to grad school? I'm like, no, it's not worth it. I need to do the right thing. So they were, most of them were very supportive. They understood the position I was taking. My leadership, they actually were supportive. And it sounds like they weren't. There were some that were, a little worse than others, but like battalion commanders, company commanders, I did get along very well with them. Still got decent qualifications, evaluations, and they kind of knew that it was the policy that was keeping me down, that I was doing good work while on the team. Other things that kind of happened through that whole process, we had a 2-star general come to 7th Group, and he had like a town hall, and that's basically where you can ask whatever question you want. So I'm kind of joking with my buddies, if I don't say something, who will? So just raise my hand and ask, hey, sir, and this is August of 22. And I say, hey, sir, 2 weeks ago, the CDC said there's no distinction between those who are vaccinated and those who are not. There's like 30 of us who haven't gotten the shot. We can't deploy. We can't move. We can't travel. Also, I put an exemption for the COVID shot back in October of last year and haven't heard anything. That said, is there any talk about getting rid of this mandate? And when are we going to hear about our exemptions? And yeah, he just responds with, have you heard of Novavax?
Wow. That's not a very good response.
Well, I shout back to him, yes, sir, it uses aborted fetal cells. Mm-hmm. And he was very surprised at that. He kind of like just kind of shocked, sort of surprised that I knew that. Or he thought that
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh yeah, if you use that line, that'll solve your problem. It's kind of like, hey, if they say this, then give them that. This is the only way that Christians think. I mean, the whole exemption process, I think, looks at religion in a problematic manner, because as I'm getting examined by my chaplain, I have to show him that my conscience reasons, my religious reasons, are legitimate religious beliefs. So if I bring in any kind of politics, any kind of science, anything of that nature, it's not considered a legitimate religious belief. And I think that's problematic as a Catholic, because I believe that God made this world. I believe that his reason, we can see him. We look at Romans 1. We look at how the natural law, it's apparent, like people, the Gentiles, they knew it was wrong. So another definition for sin is an act against reason. So I don't like that. I have to think that there's some kind of a magic fairy telling me that, oh, don't do this, and it's totally a religious reason. But at any rate, told the general he uses aborted fetal cells, and he goes off and says that, well, I don't want to fire anyone, but I will if I need to.
So what would you say to a person who says that that the military is within their right to force you to take these shots because you joined the military and basically signed away your rights to the military? Well, they wouldn't say it, sign away your rights. They would say you sign away yourself to the military. Right. What would you say to those people who say, well, you have to follow their orders?
Well, I'd say that it's an illegal order, and you can't force a person to take an experimental drug. And this was an experimental drug. And we don't lose our rights as citizens, even though we join the military. And as rights as citizens, is you can't be forced to take an emergency use product. And beyond that, we're also afforded our First Amendment rights. And as a Catholic, just as a person of faith, and you don't even need to be a person of faith, but with regards to my conscience, I can't do that. And it's also just very disproportional. I mean, we're taking an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. And I remember that phone call that I had with that company commander when I was in the middle of the woods. And he says, hey, man, we're expected to take orders, to follow orders. And I'm like, I wanted to say, no, sir, we are expected to support and defend the Constitution. And I think it's pretty clear, using our common sense, that this was a weapon in order to force people to conform in a certain way, to drive out critical thinkers, and could have very well hurt members of the military. I mean, if we don't know the effects, long-term effects of this drug, I think that's enough grounds to just not get it either. I think especially with regards to special forces too, like we're not supposed to be maybe seen as rule followers in the same extent. I think we're selected to be critically thinking. When we go through that first week of selection, we're given IQ tests, personality tests. We work as a team together. We're supposed to be thinking outside the box. So I was a little bit very disappointed actually with Special Forces leadership that are supposed to be masters of overthrowing other countries, understanding how psychological operations fits into that, to not see the great waves of just media bias, propaganda, pushing people to believe a certain narrative.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about what's going on currently. So currently, there have been reports and several written articles in the past several days of showing letters that have been written to military personnel by the Army who were discharged over the vaccine mandate. And the letters state that the Army no longer has the COVID vaccine requirement. And because of this, that the involuntarily discharged soldier can now have their medical records their military records changed so it can be like a more honorable discharge. I mean, like, what? So would you talk about this?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's been about 1 million people sending me this letter. And it was great because I actually was just up in DC this last week visiting with different senators, congressmen, their staffs, trying to push for actual solutions to this problem that can get accountability, that can get reparations for service members who are hurt, and that can kind of restore trust and make sure something like this never happens again. But this letter doesn't do this, and this letter changes absolutely nothing. So I think a lot of people want to see this and say, oh, they changed their policy, look at this new thing. It's really not. You were always afforded the opportunity to try to appeal your separation, your discharge paperwork. So and actually I think about 80% of the people who were kicked out with general discharges. And it's usually labeled generally discharged for misconduct in a serious offense. And their only serious offense was following their religious convictions, following their conscience of not wanting to take an experimental drug, which they have the absolute right to do, and not following an illegal order. But these people who are discharged, they have these generals. That means they don't get the GI Bill, they can't go to college or use that for schooling, that they have to report that when they're applying for jobs, might not get the same job bonuses for federal jobs. And that appeal process was already there. So they're just giving you the kind of login for the same appeal process. So maybe at this point, they're more willing to go through that in an expedient manner. I don't know. They could also just do this for show and keep you out of general.
So what does this show the public?
Yeah, I mean, it tries to show the public that they are more accepting, that you can come back in. And I do know that the military is hurting for numbers, so I think they do hope that people will apply. But it could still take 2 or 3 years for people's discharge levels to be upgraded. And as far as applying to come back in the military, who knows how long that would take. But I know it's foolish.
I saw that the recruitment goal was missed by 25%, so that's about 15,000 people for the Army. So would you recommend young people or children serve?
I mean, that's a great question. And that's really tricky because I see the military as being absolutely necessary for our country, that we need it in order to defend our rights, defend the Constitution. But I would have great hesitancy to just recommend it wholeheartedly to an individual. So I would just tell the person, pray about it, think about, is this something you want to do? Do you think this is something that can glorify God? And be aware of some of the struggles you might encounter. So, for instance, you might have to work with a transgender individual. Are you going to maintain your faith and morals when you're around this person? You're going to have to go through various DEI trainings. You're going to have to drive on base and hear about, I don't know, gay month, transgender month, whatever
And
niche
DEI again
ethnicity,
is diversity,
equity,
equity,
and
and inclusion.
inclusion. Right.
Yeah.
Yep. So it's not a totally no, because I do think that this is another, and this is why I'm fighting to. Well, one, I'm fighting to get readiness back for the military, and also to help service members who've been affected by this. But it's overall, it's not an institution that we can lose to the left. It seems as though we're losing the FBI, we're losing the CIA, we lost the Department of State a long time ago. I mean, forget about ATF and oh gosh, who does your taxes?
The IRS.
IRS, yeah. I mean, but these are all being weaponized against conservatives, and we conservatives need to have a place there in order to help balance it out, to just actually make it function and not be weaponized against individuals. So I talked to a West Point cadet the other night, and he has had it terrible. He didn't get the shot. He was very, overall punished for it, but still trying to be positive about him and his service. It's not an institution we can just abandon. I would say if there's something that completely goes against your beliefs and values, you can't do it. So if the shot mandate were around still, I would say absolutely do not. Now, this letter, going back to that, there needs to be a lot more done before people come back in, before trust is earned. And everybody I've seen who's seen it is laughing at it. We were treated terribly. I mean, I probably had one of the better stories that I can think of. Other people have suffered much, much more, in my opinion. And if you're segregating people, you're putting them in isolation, you're treating them, basically like Jews in Nazi Germany, then you can't expect them to just come back in. There's been no accountability. There was no accountability with the withdrawal in Afghanistan, for the lost equipment, for the Chinese spy balloon, for just so many different things. So what I'm pushing for up in DC are amendments to the National Defense Authorization Act, as well as hearings. And on the amendments, I'm trying to say, and this hasn't happened yet, where every discharge is automatically upgraded to an honorable, where everyone who's kicked out is able to come back in, able to get the back pay they lost out on, that we do an investigation into the injuries for COVID personnel, do an investigation into who knew what. That, I think, as far as hearings, that's to really get the accountability, to really ask those tough questions of, this memo said it requires an FDA approved shot. Where was the FDA approved shot? Things such as that.
So since splitting with the Army, you've been very, very active, spreading the word about your story and also advocating for change. So you've been getting together a lot with members of the Congress. And would you tell us a little bit more about your trip to DC, which you just mentioned, and also what you hope to accomplish?
Sure, absolutely. So this was my second trip to DC. So I went there late September, and just tried to kind of really just meet with reps. So I had some points of contact, was able to meet with Senator Johnson's staff, with Congressman Massey himself, with Gates staff, many other individuals. So that was sort of forming these different relationships, telling them the things that we were trying to achieve. And then coming back this week, we were able to meet with many, many more staff. So Thursday, we had 11 different offices, 2 Senate, 9 House, coming together with their staffs, talking to them about kind of our vision and our goal. And our goal is to really push for these amendments in order to get accountability, to make restitution for service members, and make something like this unimaginable. With hearings, we would like to get House Armed Service Committee hearings, to get COVID select weaponization of the government in order to expose the corruption, expose the coercion that the military, they broke their own laws. They broke their laws with the FDA EUA product. They broke their laws of not respecting our First Amendment rights. And even if we can't get a committee hearing, which actually Monday, I got to sit in on a COVID vaccine injury hearing that was being held by Marjorie Taylor Greene. And my representative, Matt Gaetz, I think he had the best 5-minute commentary where he said, a lot of people might be wondering, why is this a regional hearing and not a committee hearing? It's because a lot of politicians are wrapped up in big pharma. They're not willing to tackle this. But I would like to get at least that regional hearing so that our stories can be known, so that we can get more media attention, because we really do need to raise awareness. A lot of people are not tracking the plights that many service members went under. And we all had different coercions and difficulties, and our rights were suppressed through COVID. But I think the military suffered in an especially sadistic way.
All right. So how can people contact you?
Right. People can follow me on social media. I'm on Twitter and on Instagram. I also have a link tree, which you can find, and there's a way to email. I accept messages on Twitter as well. So that's the easy way.
You're actually very easy to find on the internet.
Well,
I looked up your name and I could see what you are working on. So you are very, very good with your social media.
Oh, thank you. And, it's really God that's just doing this. I got out of the Army in July. I actually went on an indignation retreat to pray. What do you want me to do next? Do you want me to go back to seminary and be a priest now? Do you want me to do something else, get involved politically? And then on the feast day of St. Ignatius, my article gets published. I've been doing many, many interviews. So really trying to spread this word. And I can't believe that I've been connected with so many people. And it's really just a blessing. And I'm hoping that he can continue to use me in whatever way he wants to use his miserable servant.
Well, John, our time is running out, but I have one last question for you. Given all that we've discussed today, if there's one thing that the American public can do to combat this corruption, what would it be?
I think that people, they all want to be proactive. So you need to be proactive, but you also have to be informed. So it's kind of a bit of both. So making sure that you're staying informed on the issues, you're figuring out what are those good sources of information, and then just doing more. And I think to do that, to really figure out how to direct yourself, is to pray. By praying, by trying to hear God's voice, you'll hear that specific aspect of what you as an individual are supposed to do. So it was prayer and discernment, which led me to decide not to get the shot. That led me into the seminary at first, out of the seminary. I think it's prayer, discernment, staying informed, and being proactive. That's going to be what helps lead this country, because we're not just fighting against human forces. We're fighting against demonic forces, spiritual elements. And, we need God's help as sinners to kind of combat this. So I'd really just encourage people to do those things: pray and discern, be informed, and whatever you're doing, do something more. Take that ownership.
Absolutely. I completely agree. Thank you so much, John, for coming on. We really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.